In the current political climate, inclusion has become a byword in schools and society. A diverse nation that wishes to cohere must provide a narrative of its history which includes people of marginalized groups. This is, of course, a controversial issue because many scholars suffer accusations of rewriting history, and certainly some activists have misrepresented reality in order to support their narratives. Good historians don't change historical facts, but they do provide a narrative context for comprehending past events. As a teacher with a diverse group of students, I want those students to understand that people of all groups are part of the multicultural whole of the United States, and that despite our different backgrounds, the ideals of 1776 are unifying to our people. Though many of the founders held immoral beliefs about racial differences and the institution of slavery, they also upheld morally sound ideas about the function of government and the role of citizens. Ideas such as God-given equality, inalienable rights, and the need for virtue and defense of liberty were universal principles which remain true today. What the founders accomplished, the throwing off of an abusive government and the erection of a new one established upon republican principles with checks and balances, was a turning point of history. Though the founding principles were not applied equally by the fallible leadership of the era, they built a framework upon which great progress could be made. I want my students to realize the importance of what took place in the Revolution, and I also want them to envision themselves as catalysts, as people who could change the world for the better, regardless of the challenges they may face. Rather than idolize or villainize the founders, I want students to see the founders as people like them, who made decisions which impacted the future in positive and negative ways. Historians must espouse a fair view of history, which considers the contributions of every group. For this reason, my research is focused on an area I initially knew little about: African American involvement in the Revolution. Names such as Crispus Attucks and Phillis Wheatley come to mind, but to some extent these, even in their time, were used by social commentators as tokens for the Revolution in addition to the real significance of them as patriots. The reality is much more complicated. In our textbook, African Americans are mentioned only a handful of times, yet they made up 1/5 of the population in the colonies. Most were slaves, but thousands were free men and women. The key question of my research project is, what were they doing? They took an active role in the Revolution. Some fought for the Patriots and won acclaim, such as Peter Salem, who, according to legend, fired the shot which killed the British leader at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Others, like Boston King, served the British, and still more saw the opportunity to gain freedom by escaping to the enemy's side. Their significance became clear through the competition between patriots and loyalists to win African Americans to their respective camps. Virginia's Governor Lord Dunmore and later Henry Clinton announced freedom for enslaved peoples who betrayed their rebelling masters. Thousands responded to the call. Eventually, many states in rebellion provided the same opportunity for enslaved people to obtain their freedom by enlisting. Perhaps no other group sacrificed more in pursuit of the revolutionary ideal, liberty. Throughout my paper, I describe these ways African Americans directly engaged in the Revolution. Then I examine how the Revolution helped establish the moral and political mindset which would lead to abolitionist movements in the United Kingdom and the United States. Lemuel Haynes, an African-American patriot and preacher, rebuked the Americans. While you manifest such a noble and magnanimous spirit to maintain inviolably your own natural rights and militate so much against despotism as it hath respect to yourselves, you do not assume the same usurpations. Pray let there be a congruity amidst your conduct. As scholar Benjamin Quarles notes, to be free was a natural right, which slavery violated. The contradiction of the founding ideals and slavery ultimately produced such tension that the United States tore in two not a century later. Through my research into primary and secondary sources regarding the topic, the potentially unifying nature of the principles of 1776 stands out, and I have developed a new appreciation for the role African Americans played in the founding. Another important idea is that the framers of the Constitution understood the incomplete nature of their work. Many issues remained unresolved. We are still in the great experiment, and I believe through unity in our shared history and through adherence to the upright principles of the Revolution, we may continue to find ever greater success in the pursuit of the ideal nation.